if we should get started. Okay, so the last thing I talked about in the notes was what did I do with my thing around my neck? The last thing we talked about was the Federalist Papers, and you guys turned in, hopefully you turned in last night, or the last 2 days, the thing I asked you about. You guys did a good job with that. I was grading some of them last night. I didn't do them all, but with the Federalist Papers, you can see how they really try and explain different parts of the Constitution to the readers of the New York newspapers. The Virginia and New York being deeply divided on this, George Washington really throwing his weight behind this new Constitution helped in Virginia. And then the Federalist Papers in New York, they're just so valuable to understanding the Constitution itself by men that were in the convention and understood the debates that were going on. So there's some really good stuff with that. And maybe I'll wait to talk about that a little bit tomorrow when we have some students here. But I did want to move forward with the note. So we are going to get, the 13 states will ratify. Delaware's the first state, which is a small state. And then you get New Hampshire is the 9th state, and you needed 9. But they got all 13. And so the new government will start in 1789. It'll be ratified. We'll have our first Congress and our first president, and they will meet in New York until they can build D.C. Okay. So looking at the Constitution itself, it has 7 articles, and 1, 2, and 3 are the 3 branches. Okay, so I use this a lot, come over here a lot. So if you look at this, the first 2 columns are Article 1. So this is by far the most detailed of the 3 branches in the Constitution. Of course, that's a legislative branch, all right? Article 2 is the executive branch. Article 3 is the judicial branch. Now, guys, in this class, the back half of this class, we're going to be doing the 3 branches. So I'm not going to go into any great detail on that right now. You know the basics of the 3 branches. So we will get into a lot more detail later. So that'll take us to Article 4. Okay, so if I'm doing this correctly, Article 4 of the Constitution. And this one is kind of entitled, you would call it interstate and federal relations. Okay, so we're talking about the relationship between states, interstate, and between states and the national government, that federalism between the national, state, and local governments. Okay, so they get into some details here that we have to abide by, that limits the national government and also gives powers to the states. Okay, and one of the most important ones to talk about here is a clause in Article 4 called the full faith and credit clause. Okay, the full faith and credit clause is vital. Okay, and basically what it means is that one state must recognize another state's official documents. Okay, so this is where we generally see licensing is done in the states, not at the federal level. So if you want to become a nurse in the state of Kansas, you have to be licensed in the state of Kansas. Same with doctors, same with lawyers, same with teachers. Okay, you're licensed within those states. Now, other states have to recognize that you went through the qualifications to become, licensed in Kansas. If you move to another state, other states will trust that you have been licensed. Now, you may have to jump through some hoops to become licensed in a new state, but generally you're not going to have to start over from scratch to get licensed. So if I'm a teacher and I move to another state, generally they give you a grace period to get caught up. Now, I teach history, so if I move to Texas, I would probably need to take a class on Texas history. We do Kansas history here. I had to have that class in college to become a teacher in Kansas, especially social studies teacher. So that is one of the things that the full faith and credit clause. But other things that we get licensed on, guys, are things like driver's licenses. Okay, yeah. Okay, now you can use this license, your Kansas driver's license, to drive in any of the other 49 states. All right, they just accept that. You get pulled over by the police, you have a valid driver's license from one of the 50 states, you're legal. One state must recognize the official documents of another state. Okay, and so that works really well. It really gives us mobility across state lines and so forth. The other thing is like marriage licenses. So a lot of people, get married in one state and then they move to another, and the new state you move to has to recognize that marriage. Now, obviously, the first week of class when we talked about the political spectrum, I talked about gay marriage and the fact that at the beginning, like Massachusetts was the first state to allow gay marriage. Well, the Constitution says that Kansas or Alabama, where they may not favor gay marriage, has to recognize that marriage. And I talked about the law that was passed called the Defense of Marriage Act. And that was actually signed into law by a Democratic President, Bill Clinton. And this Defense of Marriage Act said that Kansas didn't have to recognize a gay marriage from another state. Now, guys, blatantly, you think members of Congress know the Constitution, know what I just taught you about the full faith and credit clause? I mean, you would think that members of Congress would know that, but they passed a law that they knew when they passed it was unconstitutional, right? I mean, even, a high school student that just learned this, well, that law wouldn't stand up to constitutional muster. Okay, well, here's that part of government that you got to understand, that laws can only be found unconstitutional if those laws are challenged, okay? And so you would have to have a couple from Massachusetts move to a state like Kansas and then try and get the same benefits as a heterosexual couple, and then they would have to be denied those rights, and then they would have to sue, okay? And then that lawsuit would have to work its way into the federal courts, all the way to the Supreme Court. And that takes time. And you've got to find those cases, and the Supreme Court only hears cases it wants to hear. So if 4 of the 9 justices, and by the way, we do have 9 now, if you're not awake yesterday, Amy Coney Barrett has been confirmed by the United States Senate as a new Supreme Court justice, and she will take up her seat immediately. So now we're back to 9. Okay, if 4 of the 9 want to hear a case, they'll send what's called a writ of certiorari, where they will ask that a case from a lower court be sent to them. Now, this is the thing. This law stood for more than a decade without being overturned by the Supreme Court, because the court knew the American people weren't ready for gay marriage. Okay, as the decade went on, I mean, a couple decades go on. When Barack Obama ran for president, this is pretty interesting. In 2008, he was opposed to gay marriage. Okay, so, I mean, that's the Democratic Party, which tends to be, a little bit more liberal on social issues, obviously. That was, the head of the Democratic Party. Okay, by 2010, just a couple years later, President Obama and many people in both parties started to say, you know what? You've got all these states now, and I think we were up to about 10 states that were allowing for gay marriage by then. This is going to become, an issue. And so the Supreme Court caught up and they said, okay, we're going to take this case. And they declared this law unconstitutional, okay, which we all knew it was. So then we needed a case to go all the way to the Supreme Court on gay marriage itself. So you had some states that had, in their constitutions that marriage is between one man and one woman. So there had to be a gay couple that tried to get married in one of those states, and they were not allowed to. And then they sued. Okay, the case is called Feller. Okay, and it's 2017. All right, so the Supreme Court took that case and basically granted a new right that they found in the Constitution that people of the same sex could marry. Okay, and that would be nationally, because what is the supreme law of the land is the U.S. Constitution, and when the Supreme Court sets precedent by deciding a case, you have a majority opinion, that becomes basically part of the Constitution. Okay, it's the new guidelines that we read the Constitution. Okay, and again, we'll do more on that in the judicial branch when we cover that. All right. So that's the full faith and credit clause. And then the second clause in the Article 4 is called privileges and immunities. Privileges and immunities. Okay. So with this, this deals with how you're treated in a state, or if you are in a state that's not yours, the treatment that you must receive from that other state. Okay. So, guys, if you go on a road trip, okay, and let's say you're going to the West Coast, you're driving to California. Guys, you are subject to the laws of each state that you drive through on the way out there. Even if you don't know the laws, you are subject to those laws, okay? And that's your responsibility to become familiar with them. Let me just give you an example, like a gun, okay? In Kansas, we have open carry laws where you can carry a gun. Okay, now there's certain places you can't go with your gun, okay, like a school, obviously. But in some states, they don't have open carry. So if you're a person, or concealed carry, so if you're a person that has a gun and you like to take it with you when you travel, okay, you need to be aware of those states. And some states have very harsh laws, like Illinois has very harsh laws on carrying a gun. And so you got to make yourself aware. You may have to dismantle your weapon before you travel through that state. Take it apart, put it in the trunk, that sort of thing. All right, because you don't want gun charges on you. Getting pulled over for speeding in Illinois. All right, so those are that's something to be aware of. Okay, but they can't treat you differently because you're from another state. Okay, that's your immunity. Okay. And let's say, in Kansas, it's just kind of a silly example. In Wichita, Sedgwick County, we have an ordinance, which is a local ordinance that says if you play your music in your automobile and you can hear it 50 feet from your car, okay, it's too loud and you can get a ticket for that. So some of you guys, I don't know if any of you guys have like subwoofers in your car, the boom, 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 and you're sitting at a red light and I'm sitting there and somebody's, the bass is going off and, I'm old now. So I'm like, who is this person and why are they invading my space with this, with this music? And so you can get a ticket for that. Now, if you're driving to Nebraska and you cross the border and a sheriff pulls you over for, say, speeding or a taillight, but you're playing your music really loud, and he sees on your license plate there's that little SG that stands for Sedgwick County, and let's say this cop used to live in Sedgwick County, he knows there's an ordinance in Sedgwick County that you can't play your music that loud. Can he give you a ticket for playing your music loud and enforce the law of Sedgwick County? Obviously not, okay? That is your privilege, okay? Not to, be subject to other people's laws when you're not there, okay? That's just kind of a silly example, but some other stuff here, okay? Residency, all right? So if you move, and some of you guys are going to go off to college next year, okay? You may go to Manhattan, you might go out of state, okay? So if you want to be a resident of that new state, you usually have to live there for 30 days. Okay, so let's say you're a voter and you want to vote, obviously. Kansas tends to be a red state. I mean, we really don't think that Joe Biden has a chance to win here. But let's say you move to a state that's a swing state, like you go to college in Florida, okay, like the Twins did last year. And that's a swing state. It's an important state. Let's say you want to vote in Florida, okay? Well, you just have to claim this as your permanent address, okay, within 30 days of an election, and you can vote there, okay? Some states, it's longer than that. States make their own laws on this stuff, okay? So when I moved to Kansas, I went through a whole charade of things, okay? So I moved here from Louisiana. Okay, I lived in Florida, moved to Louisiana for 6 months, and then here I am in Kansas with my wife to be. And so I've got Florida plates on my Ford Explorer. I've got a Florida driver's license, but I enroll in school. I moved here in December of '95. I enroll at Wichita State in January of '96, and I'm a full-time student. I'm going back to become a teacher. Okay, and I also find a job. So I'm working graphic arts work that I had learned to do, and I'm working at what's the headquarters for Pizza Hut. It's called Tricon, and I'm working about 20, 25 hours a week, and going to school full time. What am I getting my education in? To get my teaching certificate. Back then they called it a teaching certificate for the state of Kansas. Okay. And so I go to college for a year and work for a year. I'm getting married in March of 2017. And I go to enroll in January at Wichita State. And they say I have to pay out of state tuition again. Because of course I had to pay out of state tuition first time because I haven't been paying taxes in the state of Kansas. Okay. If you pay taxes in the state of Kansas, you have the privilege of attending state universities at in-school tuition prices. If you come here from out of state, you have to pay out of state tuition. Same thing if you go to a college out of state, unless, of course, you're going to a private school, which means everybody's got to pay full tuition on that unless you get scholarships and stuff like that. Okay, but at state schools, they charge it. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I've been working here for a full year. I've been going to school full time to get what license? A Kansas teaching license. And they said, no, you still got to pay out of state. And I said, why would I move here from Louisiana to go to Wichita State to get a Kansas teaching license that's only valid in Kansas so that I could move back to Louisiana? I'm staying. Okay. And I went through the whole appeals process, and they said, sorry, you got to pay out of state. So I said, sorry, I'm going to Newman. Okay, and I could finish at Newman about maybe a semester earlier than I could at Wichita State. So I said, you know what, I gave them I said, see ya, okay? And so they didn't get my money. Newman did. All right, so I finished at Newman and got my teaching license. But if any of you guys have ever had to pay for tags for your car, in Kansas, they charge you for your tags based on the value of your vehicle. So if you have a brand new car, you pay a lot more to get your tags than if you got an old beater. You know what I mean? And so I just told my dad down in Florida, said, hey, Dad, renew my tags in Florida, send them up to me. And because that was like $40 versus paying, you know, like $350. Well, I didn't have a new car, but anyhow, so I kept my Florida tags on because Wichita State said I wasn't a resident. And so I recouped some of my money that way, kept my tags on. I got a job teaching here and I still have my Florida tags on. And people are like, why do you still have Florida tags? I'm like, well, let me tell you a story. All right. Okay. So other privileges and immunities. Okay. Let's say you rob a liquor store at gunpoint in Wichita, Kansas. Okay. And the cops are after you and you think, all right, I'm going to flee the state and the cops won't be able to follow me. So you're on I-135 headed south to Oklahoma. Okay. And you're hauling butt and you make it to the border. Okay. Can the state police from Kansas follow you into Oklahoma? Yes, they can. They have a valid driver's license. They can follow you. Now, can they arrest you in Oklahoma? No, they don't have jurisdiction there. Okay. So what would happen is the state troopers of Kansas would call ahead to Oklahoma and say, hey, we got this guy we're chasing. He's coming to you. Will you please stop him? Okay. So the Oklahoma state trooper stops you. Okay. Can he just like handcuff you and turn you over to the Kansas cops? The answer is no, he can't. Okay. You need to go through a process called extradition. Okay. You need to be extradited back. Okay. Now, how this works is you're going to have the governor of Kansas, Lori Kelly. Her office is going to call the governor of Oklahoma and say, hey, you guys have this guy in your possession, and we would like to extradite them back for armed robbery in Wichita, Kansas. And the governor will look at that and say, yeah, it looks like there's evidence of that. We are going to hand him back over to you. Okay. They may get you on speeding in Oklahoma if you were speeding across the border there. Okay. So extradition, every state has to do that. Okay. Now, let's say you're going to try and flee to Mexico or Canada for, you know, a major crime. The United States has extradition treaties with most countries in the world. So if you commit a crime and try and flee, that's generally not going to work out. Now, you can do an internet search of countries we do not have extradition treaties with. And I got to tell you guys, you're probably going to be better off in an American jail or prison than, say, living in North Korea, okay, or Iran. But you could take your chances there. Now, some of you have heard of like Switzerland. Switzerland and Swiss banks, and we also see this with some Caribbean banks, where they do not cooperate with other countries' governments when it comes to like financial crimes and banking systems, where it's very private. So you go open a Swiss bank account and the U.S. government's coming after you for, I don't know, tax evasion or something like that. They could try and get your stuff from Switzerland, but chances are Switzerland's not going to share that information with the United States government. Okay. If you look at cases like Edward Snowden, who was worked for the NSA as a contractor and was a whistleblower, blew the lid on spying on the American people by the government. He fled the country. He wound up first in Hong Kong, and now he's hiding in Russia. Russia has chosen not to extradite Edward Snowden to the United States. The other guy is Julian Assange. Julian Assange spent years in the Ecuadorian embassy in London trying to fight extradition to the United States, okay? Because his organization, WikiLeaks, hacked American government agencies and told the world what we were up to. Okay, some people would call these men heroes for exposing what the U.S. government was up against or what they were doing. Others would call them treasonous for these behaviors. I think, if you put American lives at risk, like it's telling people what the CIA is up to and stuff like that, you're crossing the line if you put American lives at risk. But if you're just exposing what the government's doing, I don't know. I might come down on the side of the whistleblower there. You know what I mean? That's kind of up for you guys. If you're interested in that stuff, there's some really good documentaries on Netflix about Edward Snowden. And in history class, if any of my history students, you still don't have a book, that would be something you could read about for history, for sure. Okay, so it wouldn't really work for government. Sorry. Hopefully, you're getting some government books found. Okay, so extradition. Okay. So that kind of talks about covers privileges and immunities. And then the next is, well, there's one thing in Article 4 about adding new states. Okay. So obviously we started with 13 states. And so in order for a territory to become a state, the process is laid out in Article 4. So there's talk, amongst some of the Democrats, not only about court packing, but also making the District of Columbia a state and Puerto Rico becoming a state. And the thinking by Democrats there is they would get 4 more senators, all those senators would be Democrats. And I don't know if I buy that. The Republican Party is fairly strong in Puerto Rico, okay? So you can go back and look and see whether, and they do use Republicans and Democrats in Puerto Rico, okay, as parties. And so that's not a given. Now, the District of Columbia would be heavily Democratic. It is, okay, just based on demographics of the population. But anyhow, how would that territory become a state? Now, normally I'd ask this question. Anybody want to chime in? Like when the Kansas territory went to become a state, how many people have to live in that territory in order for it to become a state? What's that number? How many people? Anybody got a guess out there? Cindy? Ashley? Maria? Nobody wants to talk?
80,000.
You said 80,000? That's a pretty good guess. Anybody else?
Is it 50,000?
You're closer.
60,000.
It's 60,000, okay? You have to have 60,000 people in order for a territory to become a state, okay? Now, what you need to do is you have to write a state constitution, okay? Because every state has to give its people a representative government, okay? So your state, you'll have to write a state constitution, okay? And then we have to approve that, okay? The U.S. Congress has to approve that, okay? This is called the Enabling Act. And then if we approve that, there's an act of admission. Okay, this must be a representative government. Okay, so this is where you'd have a state legislature set up where you get to elect your state legislatures, you have a governor, and that sort of thing. Okay. So all 50 states have this. They have representative governments. All of them have state legislatures. Now, one interesting point is 49 of the 50 states have bicameral legislatures. In Topeka, we have a state house, and a state senate. There's only one state that has a unicameral legislature. I don't think I've talked about this in these classes. Does anybody know which state only has a unicameral legislature? Anybody want to guess?
Alaska.
Good. No, it's not Alaska. Anybody else? Just want me to give it away. All right, it's Nebraska. Nebraska does things a little differently. We talked about them in the Electoral College. They do it a little differently. They have a unicameral legislature. In fact, Mrs. Lovelace's grandfather served in that legislature in Nebraska. Okay, so then if the Congress approves, they can become a state. That's the act of admission. Okay, so the voters of Puerto Rico, the citizens of Puerto Rico, they have a right to ask for an enabling act. So they have voted a couple times over the last decades whether to become a state or not. Okay, and thus far, the Puerto Rican people have not voted to become a state. Could that change? Absolutely, it could. And they could become a state, all right? That's one of the beautiful places you can go, guys, without a passport. We also have the U.S. Virgin Islands and Guam, okay, and the American Samoa, which are American territories that you do not have to have a passport to go visit, okay? So I've been to Puerto Rico. It's a beautiful place. Yes, they have problems with poverty. They have problems with crime. Obviously the hurricane that went through there a couple of years ago devastated Puerto Rico. But they're getting back up on their feet. My wife and kids did a mission trip there a couple of years ago, and it's a beautiful place. It's San Juan, the capital, is gorgeous and just stunning views. Okay, but anyhow, so that is how a territory becomes a state. And then one thing I want to talk about here is obligations. Okay, some obligations that the national government has to the states. What the national has to the states. And one of those is borders. Okay, so the national government can't change the border of your state without your permission. Okay, they have to respect the territorial integrity of each state. All right, now, a classic example here would be Virginia. Okay, Virginia used to be a lot bigger than it is today. All right, and during the Civil War, obviously, Virginia was one of those states that seceded from the Union, left the Union, and therefore no longer fell under Article 4 of the Constitution. So it was during the Civil War that the U.S. Congress cut Virginia in half and created a new state called West Virginia. Okay, and they did that without Virginia's permission. Okay, and that's a good example there. Now there has been talk in California about breaking the state up and creating new states. Sacramento's where the capital is. But where the real population is obviously in Southern California, right? Where you have, San Diego, San Francisco, and of course, LA. And, the people that live in rural California or Northern California don't maybe think exactly like the people in Southern California. And so there's been talk about, maybe creating 3 states out of 1. There are several counties in Colorado. Think right? I mean, this is the first state to violate federal marijuana laws by decriminalizing marijuana. But if you've driven through Colorado, there's a lot of rural areas in Colorado. And these people are like being dominated by these people in Denver. And they're like, you know what? We don't want to be ruled by these people in Denver. Okay, they have way more people. That means they have way more power. And so they've actually talked, several counties in northeastern Colorado have talked about joining with some counties in western Nebraska okay, and creating a new, a small state up there. Now, of course, they would need to get approval from Denver, okay, but that's not going to happen, right? So you could see some things like that happen. I don't know if it will, but it's always an option. But you've got to get your legislature to approve it. Okay, so that's one of the obligations, is to protect the integrity of the borders of the state. Okay, they also, the national government has to protect against domestic violence. Okay, and also from invasion. So an obligation would be, you know, the U.S. Army would be used to protect us if, say, Mexico invaded the United States. Okay, that would be an obligation that the national government would have to the states. Now, this just reminds me of a movie. Okay, in fact, it's a fabulous movie. It's called Red Dawn. Okay, now you got to watch the first one. The second one, it's a remake, is pretty good, but the first one is fabulous. Any guys seen that? Red Dawn? Yeah, it was made in the 1980s. It's got a great cast of characters. People, a lot of young actors that you would recognize today. And at the time when it came out, it was really the only pro-American Cold War movie that Hollywood put out. And the United States is invaded by the communists, okay? And it's by, you know, the Cubans and the Russians, and the Mexican government's helping out with this. And so it's kind of a cool movie. They kind of parachute into the middle of the country and then break out and try and divide the United States in two. It's a really cool movie. Red Dawn. Check it out if you're bored today, okay? Protection from invasion. You know, again, making sure that for the citizens of each state, the obligation is that they have a Republican form of government, where, you know, the people have a voice in their state government. That's an obligation, okay? Yep. And then, of course, providing that every state has representatives in the national government. Okay, so we send our people. Ron asked us from the 4th District, our senators, we have representation. We don't have taxation without representation, like the District of Columbia. Okay, now they do have representatives, but they can't vote. We call those people delegates. Okay, all right, so that kind of sums up Article 4 of the Constitution. Real quick, just talk about Article 5, which we have already talked about. When we talked about amending the Constitution, there's 2 ways to propose an amendment, 2 ways to ratify. Okay, you've got 2/3 of both houses of Congress or a convention of the states. Yes. And then to ratify, 3/4 of state legislatures or 3/4 of state conventions. Okay, so that's really all that's on Article 5. Article 6 is the supremacy clause. Okay, what you would call Article 6 is national debts and federal supremacy. Okay, this is one of the problems that, you know, the anti-federalists had with the Constitution, was that the national government would have too much power. Okay, and so Article 6, okay, national supremacy. Trying to talk and write at the same time. I think that's right. Okay. So national laws trump state laws. The U.S. Constitution trumps state constitutions. Okay, and we are all subject to national law and subject to the national Constitution, okay? Which is good, especially when it comes to our rights, right? So our Bill of Rights is a national Bill of Rights. It's incorporated into the states. And so those Bill of Rights gives us protection against our states, okay? If they want to take away our rights, the states can't do so. Okay, sorry, I just got some messages coming across, so. And then Article 7 is very simple. This Constitution must be ratified by 9 of the 13 states, and that's about it in Article 7, okay? And so really, we're not using that anymore. It's done, okay? So Article 7 is pretty much mute, all right? All right, so next thing we got to do the amendments, okay? So make sure you have your book with you when you come your next class session, and make sure you tune in. I'm grading those Federalist things, the Federalist paper things that you guys did, and I think that's about it. Anybody got any questions? Cindy, you got a question?
No.
Okay, I just saw you unmuted. Hey, I appreciate you guys getting up and joining me this morning. It was kind of treacherous on the way to work, but I'm going to hang out and work on my friend's class. I don't have a lot this week. It looks great. My teacher said my assignment this week was magnificent, to quote. All right. So I'm going to knock that out. I'll get all my grading caught up, and we'll have some fun with amendments Wednesday and Thursday, conferences for parents, and we'll look at wrapping things up next week for Section 2. Good? You guys have an outstanding day. Stay warm and go volleyball. Going up there to Newton tonight, okay? And hopefully soccer does well today, too.
Hey, what was the Fifth Amendment?
The what amendment?
The fifth one.
The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution is like a lot of things. It's got due process of law. It's got no double jeopardy. It's got, right to an attorney. It's got all kinds of stuff in it. But we're gonna talk about that tomorrow, actually. Good? All right. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks.